In Matthew 16, Jesus chastised the Pharisees who could interpret the appearance of the sky but failed to interpret the signs of the time in which they lived. Who are the Pharisees of our day?
This strong hold of sort of whiteness and white identity and pristineness is really part of what keeps us from making progress.
We need to do better. The church, rich in theological scholarship, has lingered in academic sanctuaries and ivory towers, failing to translate its lofty doctrines into a tangible and practical cultural apologetic. At the Worldview Youth Academy, we bridge this critical gap. Here, theological depth is not an end in itself, but a means to engage with contemporary cultural issues for the glory of God and the expansion of His kingdom. Our mission is to cultivate thinkers who can articulate and apply Christian truths within contemporary societal challenges. So embrace this call to worship God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. We will do better as this next generation tears down the idols of our modern culture and works to build a brighter future toward Christendom 2.0.
Non-rockabotus must stop. I don't want to rock the boat. I want to sink it.
Are you going to bark all day, little doggy, or are you going to bite?
Brett,
delusional. I love you, Jeff.
Delusional, yeah. Delusional is okay in your worldview. I'm an animal. You don't chastise chickens for being delusional. You don't chastise pigs for being delusional. So you calling me delusional using your worldview is perfectly okay. It doesn't really hurt. She hung up on me.
What?
Desperate times call for faithful men and not for careful men. The careful men come later and write the biographies of the faithful men, lauding them for their courage.
Go into all the world and make disciples. Not go into the world and make buddies. Not to make brosives.
Right.
Don't go into the world and make homies.
Right.
Disciples.
I got a bit of a jiggle neck. That's a joke, Pastor.
When we have the real message of truth, we cannot let somebody say they're speaking truth when they're not.
Take an amazing journey to a place that will blow your mind and move your heart so you will never be the same again.
Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. That is Psalm 212, one of my favorite verses. And you know the Ben Merkle version translation?
Yes, you've told me before.
Kiss the Son lest you get smoked.
Yeah.
I like that one better. But nonetheless, it's a great verse. Yeah. And it's perfect for today's show.
Very perfect.
Which we'll get into here. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Apologia Radio. Luke the Bear here, hosting again. Pastor Jeff is currently at the hospital with one of his twins, so he could be praying for them. I know they'd appreciate it. And I've got the little Zezers on my left here.
Yeah, that's me. Good to be here.
Director of Communications for End Abortion Now. What's going on with EAN right now that we need to let the people know about?
So we are, of course, always working to impact the church on a national scale and, of course, impact our culture and legislative offices with the truth on life and biblical justice. Of course, we're working towards with the gospel here, but right now the fight is local. Arizona fighting against the wicked and their efforts to harm the lives of babies in the womb all the way up to the moment of birth. So there's a lot going on that front. Yeah.
Doing?
Doing good, Luke. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've been planning this for a while, actually.
Yeah, if you don't know Nathan Anderson, get to know him through his creative works, documentaries, films that he's producing. Great stuff.
Yeah, so why do we have you on today, Nathan? You just did something.
Yeah, I just finished a film, a documentary called Honor the Sun, and released that a few weeks ago now, I think. And yeah, it's available on numerous platforms to watch. On my YouTube channel, also on the Wrath and Grace app, the Relearn app, and the Boniface Media app as well. So yeah, a few different places people can check it out.
Sweet. Well, we'll get into that more. This is actually your third documentary, correct?
Yes. So this is my second full-length documentary. I also did a docu-series called Teach All Nations. That was my second project. But yeah, this is my third project.
What has the response been to your works here?
It's been good. I mean, to be honest, it's been a long process, at least a year and a half, since I started filming and working on this. So I'm excited just to finally get that out there, have something finished and out there for the world to see. So yeah, I've been really blessed and really excited by the response. And also there's a lot of people that haven't seen my other projects, and so either they saw this one first and then saw the other ones, or vice versa, basically. So
gotcha.
Been a lot of that as well.
Yeah, I'm getting a distinctive theme also from the titles of these, that you might have a certain outlook on the future of the gospel and its triumph in history, and the nations being taught and brought to their king, and all of the good stuff that we've talked about here for a little while. So it sounds like that perspective is shared.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not very subtle, not very nuanced in that for sure. Yeah, definitely. The theme that kind of ties all these together is a post-millennial outlook, especially the first film, On Earth as It Is in Heaven. It really digs into the issue of post-millennial eschatology. And what I've tried to do with these other projects is kind of build on that foundation, not so much go back and try to present and redefend and kind of post-millennialism, but show the outworkings of that long, that longer view of history, that longer long-term view of faithfulness over time, and how that might look like from a Christian worldview perspective.
So just tell us what your thought process was in doing them in the order that you have. 'Cause you said you were kind of trying to lay out the thought there. So bring us into that.
Yeah, good question. So, the first film, it was pretty straightforward. Even when I started the project, my original goal was, I live here in Chile, South America. Most people speak Spanish, and there wasn't a lot of Spanish resources out on postmillennialism. And so I wanted to make my first documentary just a Spanish documentary about postmillennialism, just to have that as a resource for people here. And through a long series of events, the whole Spanish part didn't work out, and I ended up doing it in English ultimately.
Oh, okay.
I got the chance to interview Pastor Doug Wilson and a few other, Ken Gentry, Steve Gregg, a number of other folks. And, it just ended up making more sense to release it in English. But that was my original thought process. And, by God's grace, that film, it reached a lot of people, at least a lot more people than I expected to reach with it. And so after that, after having On Earth as It Is in Heaven out there, Teach All Nations, my idea was kind of just to, further develop kind of a biblical worldview, and what the outworkings of that would look like in the area, in different areas of life, in the area of economics, in the family, in the church, and even in politics. But there is an episode. The last one is kind of on the issue of politics, but obviously there's a lot more that could be said there. And so, really, in some ways, my third film, Honor the Son, is kind of a continuation of that fifth and final episode of Teach All Nations, and kind of digging into that whole issue of the intersection of faith and politics in a longer documentary form.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, it was excellent. I really enjoyed it, and I think I was.
You were a part of it.
It was fun. I got to hang out at ReformCon a little bit, and he interviewed me. So thank you. That was cool to be a part of that. And I think I was the ugly sandwich in between two excellent slices of bread. I think Toby and Andrew Sandlin maybe. So
did you just give yourself a nickname there?
Ugly sandwich.
You better be careful. That might stick with you.
Yeah,
the ugly sandwich.
I've been called worse.
Oh man. No, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff. I love all three of them. Like you said, the third one, the most recent one, I watched not too long ago, and you can tell, as you say, the progression. Like you are applying now the biblical perspective of the future, but showing its application in the present, and in particular for the realm of civil government and Protestant political theory and how Christians are to think through these types of issues, applying our worldview specifically to areas that Christians haven't been in recent history, right? Like it wasn't always this way.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, in recent history that we started to, do these things. Our forebears, thought deeply about these things and how to apply the biblical worldview to every area of life. But it seems like you're not just, as a filmmaker, you're telling stories. You're telling a story in a specific way, though, in seeking to recover what we would be convicted to believe are these biblical truths. And these biblical truths have led to gospel freedom, gospel blessing for the world, the prosperity of entire nations and people groups that have internalized the Christian teachings. As a storyteller, what is your aim? What are you trying to get across in talking about, this biblical perspective of the future, postmillennialism, its various applications? What are you aiming at, and what are you hoping that people will see through the stories that you're telling?
Yeah, so my aim in all of this is to start a conversation about a lot of these different topics. I obviously, and this is something that's been a criticism from some people in terms of some of my films, like, well, he didn't talk about this, and that, and he didn't bring this issue in. But the idea with a documentary like that, it's not a work of systematic theology where we're just going to cover every issue related to these topics. But it hopefully is enough to spark a conversation, or to at least present some of these different pastors and theologians, and someone goes, oh, well, maybe who's that guy? Maybe he's written a book on this subject, and allow people to dig in a little deeper. And so that's really the hope I have with these films, just to be a conversation starter. And also with the fact that today all of them are available for free. It's as easy as you could just send a link, to your friend and say, hey, watch this, or what do you think about this section over here? And so it's a great resource right now for people to share and to just, or watch in their church, small group, or a lot of different venues in that sense.
Well, at that point, man, I appreciate, brother, you having this up for free. I mean, we'll get into Chile later and like where you live and stuff. We were just talking before we started. It takes like 15 days to get where Nathan lives from anywhere. And I know from watching these films, you were all over the U.S. interviewing people. Like, it's not like you like flew people down to your hometown to get interviewed. You were all over the place, and I can't imagine the amount of time and money it took you just to travel around. And so the fact that you've been able to put this up for free for everyone is amazing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's been some great experiences. Obviously, trying to tie different trips together and doing that kind of thing. But yeah, we especially for especially for Teach All Nations and for Honor the Son, we did some long some long trips, 11 interviews, 17 interviews, or things like that in the space of like 10 days.
Whew.
So
Man, that's a lot.
so yeah, definitely has been a very fun experience though, with traveling with a friend who's helping me with some of the camera stuff, and doing that. It's definitely a lot of work, but obviously most of the work, and you guys know this too, is sitting in the office trying to put all this stuff together, trying to figure after the fact, a lot of times, how this all fits together, whether it fits together, all those kinds of fun questions.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine the hardest part was figuring out what to take out, because I imagine you got some just. Yeah. I bet you're like, the stuff you didn't include is also incredible, and you probably have enough content to do a lot of other stuff with that. And I know, like, we learned this when Marcus was here. We learned it from Darren Doan. You just let the story tell itself, and you're just trying to put the pieces together. So yeah, I'd love to see some of that B-roll extra footage you got going on there.
Well, on that note too, you're telling a coherent narrative and making these puzzle pieces fit together with that, which obviously takes skill. But one thing I really enjoy about what you've created so far is within these projects, you're also addressing the common objections, if you will, to the postmillennial position, and even to just a simple position that doesn't relegate the scriptures to a church setting or certain spheres of government. You're attempting to show how these objections, such as applying the faith here, is a violation of church and state, and how Christians should think through these things. And so one thing I enjoy is that you're actually responding to these common objections that we hear in the public square anytime a Christian attempts to walk out their door and start thinking Christianly.
Yeah, no, it's hard, because obviously there's a lot of different directions, a lot of different interests you could take in a subject like this, and it's hard to find and decide what's what to keep and what's the most important aspects. And so I think with the latest project with Honor of the Sun, I really attempted to try to stay focused on some of these central issues in terms of, like, do rulers have an obligation to Christ, as Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and just focus on those basic issues and just maybe pound those issues into the ground in some way, so that people can deal with that, wrestle with that, and then all the other conversations we might have would then flow out of that basic understanding of Christ's lordship over all areas of life. In that sense.
Just curious, are you planning on doing another one after this, or you got something in the works?
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I am.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm actually. Well, I guess if you guys want an exclusive scoop on that, I'm. Why not? I mean.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I am working right now on the very, very initial stages of a theme that's kind of been through all of these films, but I want to do something a bit more explicit in that regard. Is I want to do a documentary on the whole issue of theonomy and Christian Reconstruction. Talk a little bit about guys like R.J. Rushdoony, Gary North, Greg Bonson. And so that's what that's
sweet.
The next project I have in the works right now, and that's what
exciting.
I've been in the initial stages of kind of figuring that out.
Excellent. I for the record, between Nathan and Andrew Sandlin, you guys are like two of my favorite Facebook posters. Like every time I see your guys' posts, I'm always like, it gets me fired up. So I'm grateful for what you usually post on Facebook. So
that'll be good.
Thanks,
I'm looking forward to that project, because that will put you in the popular camp, talking about theonomy and raising those names. But I think it's important, because this is the discussion the church is having right now.
It is,
and we're talking about gospel culture and addressing the topic of Christian nationalism, and how what are the differences with what we're saying versus what someone else would be saying. So I think it's needed. I think clarity is important at this moment for for what we mean and the vision that we're aiming at as Christians.
Yeah, no, we're definitely in a interesting place in that regard, because a lot of people are talking about Christian nation and throwing ideas out there, but yeah, not the vision that guys like Rushdie and Gary North and Bonson had was pretty specific in what they were saying and what they weren't saying, And so I think it's helpful to lay some of that stuff out there, and there's so many resources. You guys know this. There's so many. Gary North was very generous with all the books he published. I mean, he left them all out there for free on his website on PDFs, and so people who really want to look into those things, those resources are available, even the guys at Chalcedon, they have a bunch of their resources to read online and stuff like that. And so my goal with this next project is that people would take an interest in looking into some of those guys and what the work they've done.
I think that'll help, because honestly, these guys, brilliant minds, prolific writers, lecturers and so on, and someone might be intimidated just to pick up one of their works and start diving in. When you read Rushdoony, you're reading dense theology and information, but seeing his beliefs presented in a visual form too, like you say, I think will give people an inroad in thinking, well, okay, there's more to what's being said here, and I need to investigate it, because it's going to give some direction on what we're dealing with today.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a thought pop up. You were talking. I wasn't planning on having this little mini discussion here, and I also meant to play the trailer at the beginning. Forgive me. I will play the trailer for the film. But I don't know. Did you guys happen to see? I saw this clip a couple days ago. I'm not entirely sure when it was from, but it was Sam Waldron and Joel Beakey.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just pulled.
They were discouraging theonomy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, since we're talking about this, I'm gonna pull this up real quick. And I was very disappointed, especially
Beakey, right?
Beakey, who's like the guy on the Puritans, and then to see this clip. And anyways, let me. I'm gonna go ahead and play this. Gabe, I pulled it up. If you can pull it up, and then we'll just discuss this real quick. I don't have any audio though. Oh, my fault. Clip. Sorry. Anyways, let me. Hold on. I'm gonna go ahead and play this. Gabe, I pulled it up. If you can pull it up, and then we'll just discuss this real quick. That's my fault. Try this again. I had the show playing in the background, but I forgot I had it muted. All right, try this again.
We can't simply ignore the history of terminology. Gary North, Rousseau Rushdoony, and Greg Bonson, they are the origin of this. They're the fountain of theonomy. They identify themselves as theonomic. Now, if you're going to say you're theonomic, you either believe what they believe and pay attention to history, or you tell us plainly where you disagree with them. Theonomy does not merely mean that you believe in God's law. I know that's the etymology, but that's not what it means. It's not what Rushdoony, it's not what North, and it's not what Bonson meant.
You know, the Reformers and Puritans were so clear on the biblical teaching of the law. And the categories are so just crystal clear in the role of the moral law, the civil law, the ceremonial law. They got it right. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Theonomy is not the road to go for you or for your church.
We can't simply ignore the history.
Nathan, I'd love to hear your take on that, especially you're in that mode right now, right? You mentioned those guys they just mentioned, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have such a huge issue with what Sam Waldron said right there, because I think he's right. I think theonomy, it's important how we define terms. Even Greg Bonson talked about this in the introduction to his book on theonomy and Christian ethics, where he recognized that the term theonomy has been used by a lot of different thinkers to refer to a lot of different things, Paul Tillich and other guys, and that he was using it in a specific way. And so I don't have a huge problem with that, and frankly, it's because I don't have a problem with Greg Bonson and Gary North and these guys. It is true. And, if you go to the larger clip, they start going into, well, these guys disagreed with each other on different things and all that. And so, and they use that kind of as an excuse like, oh, well, they disagreed. So, that means, we can't have them all together. I'm like, wait a second. So you got a Dutch Reformed guy on the stage there with a Reformed Baptist guy, saying that, well, these guys disagreed. Well, you guys disagree,
Right.
And I find it really ironic that they would clip those two guys together because, Sam Waldron being a Baptist and, what's his name? Joel Beakey's like, starts talking about well, we don't need theonomy because we have the Puritans and we, have the Reformers and it's like, I don't know how, good it would be to be a Baptist in Calvin's Geneva. If you guys want to be really specific, I think Gary North would probably have a better scenario for religious liberty than that particular situation. So, I don't know. But to me, what's interesting about the whole conversation there is they seem to be very concerned about postmillennialism and theonomy. I mean, the guys at Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary, they keep publishing podcasts and articles and, and in some ways, I feel like even some of the themes of that conference they had, it was like, optimistic amillennialism kind of a thing. It was kind of, also a nudge towards the whole post-millennial conversation that we've been having for a long time. And so they seem to be very concerned about what's going on in terms of theonomy and post-millennialism. And on the other hand, I think a lot of people on our sides are very appreciative of what those guys are doing. And, I feel like the pushbacks coming a lot from one direction, and the guys on our side are responding. Obviously when someone makes those kind of statements, you want to respond.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an odd situation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot, and we've talked about this, especially with the whole Christian nationalism conversation. I think the reason that these topics, these conversations are so prevalent right now within the church is because we would all agree that our position has the answer to the questions, the answers to the questions, and the church has not had those answers, and so I think that's why we're seeing it kind of a resurgence, because we're like, yeah, we can answer that. We've been saying this for a long time, but we'll continue to say it, and even there's been a lot of chatter, guys saying, well, saying that theonomy and postmillennialism they thought was dead, and we're like zombies coming out of the grave, sort of a thing, which is just hilarious to me. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Just that we have the answers that the cultures, I shouldn't say the culture, that the church is looking for to respond to the culture.
Yeah, I think that, especially since COVID and since all the insanity broke loose, I think there's been some important dividing lines that have formed within evangelicalism, and people, a lot of things have come to light and kind of been exposed in terms of how a lot of evangelicalism had gotten used to responding to the culture, responding to the government, and and I think that the faithfulness of churches like you guys, and others that were able to respond in a different manner was really rooted in those theological convictions you guys and we had before 2020 came around. And so a lot of people were in 2020 looking around trying to, well, what do we do now? How do we respond? But as you were saying, we got to that stage having, I think, a lot of the tools.
Yeah.
And having the response that was, written, a long time ago, as to what the role of the church is, what the role of the state is, and more than all of that, a optimistic view of the future that understands that these seasons will pass, and it is important to be faithful in the midst of them, knowing that Christ's kingdom will continue to advance, and knowing that Christ's enemies will be put to shame ultimately, and so I think that's really important as we, coming out of this whole situation and considering whatever else may lie ahead for us, in the time period that we're living through. I think that that whole event just kind of shook people, kind of put a lot of these ideas out there, though not so much at the level of the seminary. I think it's more the people in the pews, listening to podcasts, reading books, or watching movies that have, and so I think a lot of folks in the seminaries feel pretty threatened because it's like, well, these guys are talking about all these things that we didn't learn in seminary and that weren't, that actually kind of contradict, some of the ways we were taught to operate and to act. And so I think there's definitely a conflict there, and I don't know. Hopefully, some of these conversations will trickle up into the seminaries, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But so I think there's definitely a divide there, though, for sure.
Oh,
I suspect part of that is why we have guys like the guys at Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary so concerned about putting out all this material against theonomy and against postmillennialism.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head with, the events over the last 4 years really were an unveiling, and it showed us how woefully inadequate and ill-equipped we were, the church, I should say, for the most part, to deal with things like civil tyranny and the encroachment upon the church's mission and the effects of the culture and all those things. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think people are hungry for those answers, which we are of the perspective that, we would say that our position has those things. What I find interesting about that clip is they speak very highly of the Puritans. The Puritans have that, and you mentioned Bonson's work, Theonomy and Christian Ethics. What I love about that book is at the end he includes the early legal codes for the colonies, and how every law next to it there's an Old Testament citation for the basis of it from the Pentateuch, and so that fires me up, because when you see that, you see what our nation's earliest legal codes were based on. Like, where were they looking as the source of authority? They were looking to God's word to tell them what laws to write and how to write them, how to apply them in society. So if someone is telling me, hey, listen, the Puritans got it right, stay with them, and I say, great, I'm going to go read the Puritans, and then I see things like that, I think, well, are they theonomying? Like, is that what they were doing? Because this looks a lot like the application of God's law, and in particular, God's judicial standards to the realm of civil government. Is that what I should be listening to then? I think that's the problem that a lot of, like you said, Christians that are just listening to materials and podcasts, not existing in the seminary realm so much, are thinking like, okay, you told us to go read these guys and listen to these guys. Well, guess what? We went and read those guys and listened to those guys, and they disagree with you. So there's a little bit of an internal conflict going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. You want to add anything to that, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think these conversations, I mean, when we go back into history, I think a lot of these guys have a very specifically curated, understanding of some of the Puritans and others, because but as you say, when they discover, other aspects of what they thought, it's a little shocking, because it obviously doesn't line up with what is being taught and what is being set forward. And either way, I mean, because obviously sometimes, these discussions about historical theology can get, extended, and someone's like, well, I studied John Owen, and I got this out of it, but I think John Owen thought, was differently, and, we could get into long discussions about those kinds of things. But ultimately, we go back to just basically, well, what does the Bible teach, and what does the Scripture teach about these things? And when we are faced with these kinds of conflicts and strife, and where we actually have to go, well, no, the government's wrong about this, and that's when I think the rubber it meets the road with a lot of the things, and that's been really interesting for me. And even in the story of my film, because I released my first film on February 15th, 2020.
Right.
And at least here in Chile, everything kind of went nuts. I think it was around March 11th or 12th.
That was before shutdown.
So,
how providential.
Yeah.
I know, and so I always, in God's providence, I made a film about optimistic eschatology right before this, world-changing event, basically, and so it's almost, on paper, it's like that's a weird time to release a film about postmillennialism, but God in His providence, used it specifically for that time period. So it's been very interesting.
Man, that's incredible. I'm going to play the trailer here. We're about the halfway point. I'm going to play the trailer real quick. It's just a minute long, and then I want to dig into the film a little bit more, and then I want to hear about Chile and just I have a lot of questions. So we'll just play the trailer real quick here. Go ahead and pull it up, Gabe.
Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. A king is a political power. A lord is a political power.
Christ was crucified in public. Everything about Christianity is public. It's meant to be out there in the world, influencing things.
Jesus is Lord. He's Lord of all of life.
America has a Lord. Jesus is His name, and He was born 2,000 years ago.
If you're not post-mill, if you're not optimistic about the future, and you look at the church disintegrating into faithlessness, you think, well, we're right on schedule.
Oops, I accidentally played it again. Okay. So why the name Honor the Son?
So honor the Son comes from Psalm 2, where basically it is a threat against the kings of the earth, and calling them to obey the Son, to kiss the Son, if we were going to be a little more literal, right? To submit to Him, lest they be destroyed. And so, the whole aspect of Psalm 2, it portrays, the rulers of the earth, right, standing against the Lord and against His Messiah, and ultimately being defeated in their attempt to stand against Christ. And as a result of that, right, in that psalm, we see that the nations are given to Christ as His heritage, and the ends of the earth as His possession. But that process goes on throughout history of God's people going into the world and taking possession of the land, in that sense. And the rulers of the world are warned to not get in the way, basically. Right. This train is moving forward, and don't get in the way, or you're gonna be crushed, ultimately. And so that's kind of the idea, in terms of Psalm 2, and in terms of the place of Christ as King of Kings. That's what I wanted to mainly portray.
So is what you're saying then that the rulers of the earth, when they are called to kiss the Son, that doesn't just mean that they need to get their individual souls saved for heaven one day?
No,
that there's actually more to their duty?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, their duty as rulers is to, honor Christ, and I mean, in one sense, the duty of all of us is to honor Christ wherever we have been placed, in terms of our vocations, in terms of our callings. And, if we happen to be political leaders, or we're called to that, then we have to honor Christ in that sphere as well, ultimately. And understanding as well that the whole authority that rulers have it comes from God directly, and so they must submit to Christ because Christ is the source of their authority as well. And so if they don't submit to Christ, they're in rebellion, against their king.
Yeah.
Right. Whether they want to recognize him as that or not, he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so I think that is an important foundation for any conversation about political theology, ultimately.
Yeah, no, I appreciate something you just said, that we are to honor the Son in every sphere, God ordained sphere of government. Every jurisdiction should honor the Son, and whether it be individual, family, church, civil. And I think what part of the problem with the church right now, and we'll get into Chile because I don't know, I have no idea what it's like in the culture down there, but in the U.S., I mean, the church, we're battling all this kind of two kingdom theology where, we're like, yes, you honor the Son in your own private governmental jurisdiction, but when it comes to the civil realm, that's a different jurisdiction. They shouldn't have to honor the Son, or we shouldn't, as Christians, tell them that they are to honor the Son. And I think we are where we are at in our culture because of it. We mentioned it last week, but that prophetic vision, there's been no prophetic vision from the church saying, kiss the Son lest you get smoked. right? And so I appreciate what you just said. And I don't know if,
well, that's the practical effect of what you're saying, is that the civil sphere is just kind of left to go its own way. And it's left to operate under an autonomous authority, which will end up being itself. And when its authority ends up being itself, it becomes its own God.
Yeah.
Right? The source of its own law, essentially. So to not tell the civil sphere to kiss the Son is to allow the civil sphere, which is where the laws come from that affect our lives, to go the way of tyranny. Because there's no ultimate authority over the state saying, you must obey the Son, you must rule in the fear of the Lord. Like, they need to hear Psalm 2, which, I mean, the apostles also quote this in the New Testament copiously, right, about the resurrection of Christ. You are my Son, today I have begotten you. Jesus is the first begotten from the dead. So he was raised, right? He was resurrected from the dead in order to reign, in order to fulfill a particular purpose. Of course, as our intercessor, as the one who secured our redemption eternally, but he didn't just rise, he ascended. And then after he ascended, he sat down on his throne for the purpose of ruling.
Right.
And I love what you said, Nathan. You connected the purpose of Christians, not just in a spiritually redemptive sense, but in a creationally redemptive sense, right? You connected that to our calling in Genesis, which is as image bearers of God, which Christ restores us to that office, to take dominion, to extend the rule of the king as far as the curse is found, right? That's what Jesus saves us to. He saves us from damnation. He saves us from eternal condemnation under the wrath of a holy and just God, but he also saves us to good works. And those good works have to do with extending his rule, building God-honoring culture, and really overturning all the effects of the curse. So it's a creational view in which we're saying Jesus is not just a spiritual king. He's not just a cosmically redemptive boss of my individual life or over the church's life. No, he's actually the Lord of all creation. Like, everything that's made, he has authority over. It belongs to him because he made it. And Jesus put the stamp on that when he was raised from the dead and when he was ascended as king. That's what the gospel is, because that's the gospel that the apostles were preaching, right? Acts 13:32. And we bring you the good news that what God promised to the fathers, he has fulfilled to us, their children, by raising Jesus, as it is written in the second Psalm. So the gospel of the kingdom is all wrapped up in this.
Amen.
Yeah. I think one issue that sometimes gets overlooked in a lot of these conversations is, a lot of times, we tend to think, well, this is just an issue of, wrapping together this issue and postmillennialism and stuff like that. This is just an issue of eschatology, right? But I think in a lot of ways, it's more of an issue of the gospel in terms of soteriology, because what ultimately a lot of people are saying is we cannot expect wide transformation or extensive transformation in the world today, or in the next 50 years, or in the next 500 years, because the gospel we have just isn't going to cut it, right? The gospel we have is not powerful enough to bring about this vision of discipled nations. And and a lot of times they really do believe that the only way the nations are really going to change is at the second coming through a violent judgment of God. That's the only way the enemies of Christ are going to be subdued, is on that last day in a violent manner.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting, because that's not what the scriptures teach at all. We could consider the fact that the scriptures speak of the kingdom of God being like a mustard seed, starting out slowly and growing into a large tree. Or we can consider Psalms 110, which is also very important. And it speaks of Christ ruling in the midst of his enemies.
Yep.
And that's a very interesting one, because that means that his rule does not begin when everything is pristine. It begins in the midst of enemies. But the other thing that I always find very interesting is verse 3 of Psalm 110, because it says, your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power. And so there's an element there of persuasion that does not happen in a top-down manner.
It's voluntary.
It's voluntary. And then we even see that in Isaiah chapter 2, where the nations flow to Zion, right? The nations come, the nations seek out the Lord ultimately. And so, and that does not happen, at the second coming. At the second coming, that's fire falling from heaven, right? That's not the nations going out to seek the Lord. And so I think it's very important to understand our political theology is connected to our belief in the power and the sufficiency of the gospel to transform hearts and minds over time, and to ultimately bring about this vision that we see in Scripture, that of nations submitting to Christ, and of enemies either being destroyed along the way or enemies being turned into friends.
Right. Like just like we were, right?
Exactly.
We were once enemies,
Exactly.
and God's redemption brought us from death to life.
Right.
And we were brought under the lordship of Christ. We were made his voluntary subjects because we saw him, and we saw the glory of Christ, and we offer ourselves freely as living sacrifices to him. And that's, I love what you said there. It's how powerful is your gospel? How much power do you believe that Christ actually possesses?
Yeah. It's like one of my favorite Joe Boot quotes is, he says, people always tell me I have an over-realized eschatology, and my response is say, no, you have an under-realized soteriology. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Good stuff. Okay, so let's tie this in. I want to hear about where you live. So when I mentioned earlier that Nathan's very far away, for example, it's like 110 here in Arizona today. We're literally kissing the sun.
Yeah, right. Nice.
And it's like cold winter for Nathan.
And it feels like we're perishing.
Yeah. So I looked at a map before we started. So basically he's like far east coast.
Yeah, he's on a different continent, y'all.
Like US Eastern, if you go straight down. And then like the southern tip of Australia, he's like, that's where he's at in Chile, which is insane. Why are you there?
Yeah, it's weird because we're east of the East Coast, but we're on the west coast of South America. And we're pretty far down. Yeah, I've lived here my whole life pretty much. My parents came down here when I was 8 months old as missionaries, and so I've lived here. Yeah, and pretty much I'm 37 now, so yeah, long time. And but I've also traveled a good bit to the States and gone back and forth. But yeah, it's definitely home down here. And we live in Pichilemu, which is a small coastal town, about 3-hour drive from the capital, from Santiago. And part of an elder here at a little Reformed church. And yeah, we love it here. Our town is pretty well known, mostly just well known for surfing, I guess. That's probably the biggest thing we have going here. And we have really good surf breaks, good waves, and yeah, a lot of people travel here because of that.
Right on. So are you a full-time missionary, or you do other work, or how do you pay the bills?
Good question. Well, so right now, I've kind of transitioned into doing kind of filmmaking stuff.
Okay.
Kind of full time.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and just serving as an elder at our church, and yeah, a few other things
Excellent.
along the way. But yeah, mostly just making films these days.
Is your wife from Chile, or is she from the U.S. as well?
Yeah, my wife is from Chile too.
Okay. Very
And,
cool.
Yeah,
Very cool.
and both my kids are born here, and yeah, they have dual citizenship and all that.
Oh
good
wow,
stuff.
nice. So what is the culture like there? Is it similar to the U.S.? Like, because we're having this conversation. Everyone listening right now understands what we're talking about because we're used to the U.S. culture. Is it similar? Is it different? I mean, are you celebrating the Noahic Covenant month down there right now? Like, do you have targets with, or I don't know how you use target. Targets, I don't know how you say it in Spanish. Like, are you, do you have to put up with that kind of nonsense in June, or what's it like down there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I've traveled a good bit throughout South America and Latin America. Yeah, a lot of the stuff from the States trickles down here, and I imagine other parts of the world as well.
Sure.
And so we have all that craziness. We've also been going through a lot of political upheaval throughout since 2019. We had, just kind of a whole uprising thing here. And yeah, we got into this mode where they decided they wanted to rewrite the Constitution of Chile.
Wow.
And there are giant protests and all this stuff going on. And so we had, I think it was 2 or 3 constitutional conventions that were a joke, and that all happening, throughout COVID and all that craziness. And finally, after spending all this money, energy, and everything else, the last proposed constitution that would have been a complete train wreck got voted down. And so so we've been in a time of a lot of political turmoil. Our president right now, I think I don't know if he's the youngest in Chile's history, but somewhere along those lines. And it's been a pretty terrible administration in that regard. And I mean, just to have an idea, Jacobin magazine was just singing his praise when they found out he was becoming president of Chile. So yeah, it's we're in a very complicated situation. Obviously, evangelical Christians are the minority here in our country. Yeah, maybe 16% or 20%, something along those lines.
What's the dominant view? Catholicism?
Probably, yeah.
Catholicism, but they've lost a lot of steam over the church. The Roman Catholic Church here has lost a lot of power, a lot of just socially and politically and everything else. And so yeah, things have definitely been trending more towards unbelief and away from any form of Christianity for a while here. And so we're struggling with a lot of the same things you guys are, and we're probably in a much more difficult situation than the U.S. is in a lot of ways.
So it's some form of democracy, I'm assuming.
Yeah. We saw some form of democracy.
What are the you said they're trying to change the Constitution. Like, what are the roots of the founding of Chile as a nation? I'm assuming it had a lot of heavy Roman Catholicism and those roots.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even like law structure, is it going to be similar to what we have here? Anyways, I'm just curious what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think throughout all of South America and a lot of these different nations, you have the tradition of kind of the American founding, and you have the tradition of the French Revolution. And so it kind of depends on the nation you're in, which of those two traditions are more dominant. you know, and obviously the whole idea, the tradition of the French Revolution is a lot more, you know, godless and a lot more, you know, and is a lot different than that of the American founding. So, you know, I think there's moments in Chile's history that it's been more to one side than to the other. But yeah, I mean, definitely the people that are in power today are definitely on that on Team French Revolution for sure.
Gotcha.
In that regard.
Just curious, what year was Chile founded? Do you know?
Oh, I don't remember.
Was it after the U.S.?
Yeah, it was definitely after the U.S.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're about to have a birthday here pretty quick for the U.S.
Yeah, hopefully we have birthdays left for a while after this. Things are trending in a very negative direction.
Well, that brings me to the next question I had, and I always ask people from other nations this question. We have, you know, we're up for a very interesting 6 months or so, and I know that this election affects the world and other nations. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, how this election here in the U.S. is going to affect you down there in Chile.
Or do you think it will?
I mean, it definitely will, obviously, because, you know, also the U.S., as I said, they export a lot of these ideas. Whoever's in power, you know, throws money into different causes that, you know, progressive causes around the world and all of that. And there's obviously pressure. You know, even if you had a conservative president or a conservative government, there's pressure from the UN, there's pressure from these different international organizations to do things a certain way and to structure things a certain way. And so obviously if you have a president that is all about that stuff in the US, that makes it very hard. But if the US president is not about pushing some of those agendas internationally, that's a better position for everybody, you know, outside of the U.S. who's somewhat conservative, I guess.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. That's helpful. So what is your freedom of speech laws like? I mean, you mentioned it was pretty crazy during COVID. We had it pretty easy here in Arizona.
In Arizona,
yeah.
It relative to other places.
Yeah. So, like, are you? 'Cause I'm curious. For the stuff that you're preaching, right, in these films, is it? I'm imagining in some places in the U.S. is it easier to be bold like that and speak out than it is in Chile, or is it similar? I'm just curious what the atmosphere is like.
I mean, we do have a level of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, I guess. I haven't received, you know, that much pushback in this context from the films and from that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely say in a lot of areas, you know, especially, you know, issues like, you know, like crime and self-defense and all that, like the United States offers a lot more liberties in that regard. Also, you know, just in legal fights for religious liberty or different situations, I feel like the United States, you know, has a lot of organizations, you know, has you guys and other people that are involved. And yeah, I mean, you have a whole array of groups, and we're a pretty small bunch down here for sure. And also Chile is a pretty small country. I think our population is something like 20 million people. So, you know, compared to the US, that's tiny in that regard.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely you guys, I would say, have a lot more opportunities and resources on hand of people trying to work in that kind of, you know, to advance, you know, at least conservative politics, and even better if we're talking about actually, you know, a Christian worldview perspective in that sphere.
Yeah, and as long as Chile is, that's about one person per square mile, I think.
Yeah.
He was telling us how long it is. If you look at a map, it's crazy.
Yeah.
How long it's super narrow.
And I think like a good percentage of the country lives in Santiago, though. So it lives in the capital. I think it's like a third or something like that. So yeah, it's an interesting situation. Once you leave the capital city, there's a lot of, you know, open space, I guess.
Yeah, and we were talking about like basically the whole southern portion is Patagonia and probably not a lot of people living there, and although it's beautiful there, but
yeah,
interesting. That's very interesting. Well, cool. Well, we're getting low on time. You got any other questions you want to ask them while we got them?
No, man. This has been great.
So tell people where to go to find your stuff.
Yeah, so you can find well, I guess the probably easiest would be just to go to my website, which is onearthfilm.net. And there's links to some of my social media there. And there's also links to where you can even watch the films that I produced there. If not, you can just search on YouTube for On Earth as It Is in Heaven. It should pop up, or Honor the Son, Teach All Nations. Those are all available on YouTube as well. So that's another way to do that. And yeah, but probably through my website would probably be the easiest,
Excellent.
most direct way.
Excellent. Well, thank you, brother, for being on today. And by the way, those who are all access, stick around. We will have Nathan on for a little bit on the after show to continue this conversation. But thanks for being on, and I'm excited for this next project you're doing, and looking forward to that. And definitely want to have you on again in the future. And if you got something coming up that you want to talk about, let me know. We'll see if we can find a spot for you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll finish the show here. Just again to mention our other sponsors. Of course, Heritage Defense. They would also be very much in line with what we're talking about today. And so Bradley Pierce, he writes all of our equal protection bills. He's always on call, or not always on call. Half the time he's on call for Heritage Defense. And I know I sound like a broken record, and I mean it when I say it. If you're watching this and you homeschool your kids, you need to just go right now. You can just get off the show if you want and go to heritagedefense.org and sign up your families to make sure you're protected if a 3-letter agency comes to the door. Hand them the phone, talk to my lawyer. Super, super affordable. I mean, it's like just give up a couple of coffees a month maybe, and you're good to go. Pretty cheap, and apology in the coupon code, and you get the first month free. We love them a ton. And then, of course, Amtech Blades. I got my knife here today out in Bill Rapier. He's a good friend of ours, legendary Navy SEAL, makes an amazing blade. We got our battle axes, and he's been a faithful partner with us as well. And if you go to amtechblades.com, you can put apology in the coupon code and get 5% off. And he donates 5% to End Abortion Now to help save babies. Oh, that was what I was going to ask you, Nathan, real quick. What are the abortion laws like in Chile?
That's a really good question. So in very recent years, I think, because I'm getting all these controversies all jumbled together, because so like 2000, I think it was either 2018 or 2019. Up until then, abortion in all of its form was completely illegal here in Chile. And I think in 2018 or 19, they passed a law to allow abortion in the case of your risk of life for the mother, and in the case of rape, and something, whatever the main three exceptions are. So that's a very recent event, and then that got all mixed together with what happened with our Constitution and all that craziness.
Okay.
But that's where we're at today, and
interesting.
And so abortion still isn't very common. I remember reading an article a while back of like a girl who tried to get an abortion based on kind of the rape exception from like way in the south of Chile, and no doctor would do it, basically. And she had to actually end up flying to Santiago to find a doctor who would be willing to do that. And so it's we're in an interesting place, but not obviously, as in a lot of places, things have been trending in that direction for a while now.
Wow, that's really interesting. Well, praise God. I mean, you're far better off than we are in that department. So, we'll talk. I'll talk to you more about that. Actually, I'm curious. Ask more questions. Maybe we can talk about that in the after show. So, again, if you're all access, please stick around. We'll be